The 2024 wide receiver draft class might be one of the most loaded draft classes of all time. However, there are some guys that the Dynasty community is overvaluing. And on today's episode of the Regression to Mean podcast, we are breaking down 3 wide receivers that we think are being overvalued in Dynasty Rookie Drafts. I'm your host, Shaun, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, my good friends, and my fellow knowers of ball, Keegan Thompson and Aidan Holler. Keegan, how you doing today, man?
I'm good. We're coming off recording the 3 players that you should be drafting that might be a little undervalued. And now we're here to talk about overvalued wide receivers that we think you might want to avoid. And I'm going to compare 2 teammates today. And I'm excited about it.
We like that. And it's, again, the team of your draft crush, Michael Penix. So it's a little spoiler alert there, but you've been a very Huskies guy here on this
you see him play live once at the Coliseum and everything changes, like from that moment on, it was just all aboard. Penix Patrol, hashtag Penix Patrol. I'm going to start the hashtag.
Yeah.
Get it trending.
Aidan, how you doing today, man?
I'm rocking. The juices are flowing after that episode. Talking about this wide receiver class just gets me riled up. There's no way around it. It is so stacked. And just thinking about like these guys on my fantasy rosters in just a short couple of weeks is it's awesome. So it's not all sunshines and daisies. We gotta fade a couple of guys today. It's public's too high.
It sucks. You're right. Because I look at all these guys and there's no one I sit here and I'm like, I don't like them. I don't like them. I don't like all these guys are awesome. Like they all bring a different flavor. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, because there are so many good receivers, we have to separate the good from the great, or like the elite from the okay. We have to assess which receivers are going to be good, maybe in real life, in specific NFL roles, or are actually going to help us win fantasy championships for dynasty managers. So I feel like that's our job here, and that's what we're trying to do on today's episode. And it's pretty simple. We have 3 wide receivers in the 2024 class that we think dynasty managers are overvaluing and it should be probably avoided in rookie drafts. Now, this can always change with draft position, draft capital, with teams they go to, right? So we'll probably do a redo or part 2 of this episode once these guys land on their teams. But I think this is good context just to know, hey, these guys, we think they're being overvalued right now in rookie rankings. Again, this is Keegan already alluded to it. This is our 2nd episode on the 2024 wide receiver class. If you haven't had a chance, go check out our undervalued episode, much more positive vibes there. All right, guys, overvalued wide receivers. We're going to kick things off with you, Aidan. This is the weirdest prospect I have come across since I've gotten really into the NFL draft. I have not seen someone look so good on tape, but then have such little production until their age 23 season. Tell us why you think the dynasty community right now is overvaluing Xavier Legette.
It's going to break my heart.
This is a hard one. It's just like, to your point, like the tape from 2023 is like, this is a good wide receiver. But then
it's like AJ Brown. It's like you're watching college AJ Brown.
You look at the stats and you're just like, what was happening? Like, why did this take so long? So just kind of taking a step back here. Big guy here. This is one of the bigger wide receivers in this class, 6'3", 225. Big dude, runs pretty quick, 4.47, 9.66 on the RAS scale. Like, relative, for his size is very good. Very good. Shaun alluded to it. He's going to be 23 this fall. So, I talked about an older guy in our last video. Pearsall is going to be 24. This guy's going to be 23, not terribly old, but, still on the older side. Did 5 years at South Carolina. Like one of the biggest red flags to me is in his first 4 years, he didn't clear 20 catches or 175 yards in any of those seasons.
Nuts.
It's insane.
That is nuts.
And it's like
fucking crazy.
It's not like he's at like, Alabama or Ohio State where it's like wide receiver like only 2 wide receivers have been drafted from South Carolina since then. Jalen Brooks last year in the 7th round, who I honestly didn't even know existed, and then Shi Smith a couple years ago.
Oh, and Debo.
He got drafted. That was after. This was pre-Legette. That was pre-Legette.
Okay.
So like in terms of like guys that were in like the wide receiver room with him, it's not like he's competing against some alphas. There's no reason. And then like you could argue the QB play his first 3 years like was nothing special, but he had Spencer Rattler for 2 years. Like that's not an excuse here. He threw for over 3,000 yards, both of those years. But then you look at his stats this year,
insane,
and they're really good. 70 catches, over 1,200
Sounds like
yards,
I want to draft him.
and 7 catches. So you're like, wow, this guy's really like, just where has it been? 16th ranked wide receiver in terms of PFF last year. It's just a really confusing eval, and there's too many red flags here for my liking.
So many.
And I think Shaun meant he's wide receiver 10. This isn't cheap, he's in that tier of hey, what are we doing with these guys type tier where, at the second round turn, this is what you're looking at. So I wouldn't say I'm out on him, but at price, it's no way. There's a couple guys, let's see, guys below him that I would personally take. I'd rather have Pearsall. I'd rather have Corley, Baker, McMillan. There's a couple guys down below that I'd personally rather have. Because again, this isn't a guy that I think is gonna, have a chance to succeed in the slot role. He's a true X or Z. This is a guy that's gonna be playing on the outside. He did surprisingly play just over 30% in the slot last year, which kind of surprised me. It's just his build and kind of just game doesn't really translate to the slot. So we'll see where he goes. I think he really needs the right situation to work in the NFL, but I don't know. I just don't see a good floor here for him to where I'd be willing to pony up early second round draft capital and be I can slot him into my lineup, week 1. I think there's a lot safer options just beyond him at wide receiver and kind of some of the other positions.
I think the floor is out of the league in 3 years, right?
Sure.
I think the floor is almost non-existent. And I think the ceiling, if you look at the 2023 tape, where it was insane. The angles he was taking, the speed on tape, the ability to break tackles, it was fucking crazy. Some of the, some of the most electric tape you're going to watch outside of Malik Neighbors this year came from Xavier Legette. So there's a lot to like in your brain. It's you get bonked a little. You need to get bonked when you watch Xavier Legette film. You're big fast. You you
it's confusing. It's confusing. His eval is just really confusing. And it's
I posted the screenshot of his Pro Football Reference on our Twitter before. I'm how is this even real? It's 130 yards, 160 yards, 130 yards, 180 yards, or 170 yards. 1,200. You're what happened here?
Where were you? What were you doing?
And he's a late breakout, and JJ Zacharyason's model has compared his final year production with his previous year production. There's similar profiles that have come out before in the past, and it's not a terrible profile. The other receivers have been Jaden Reed, Deebo Samuel, Cedric Tillman, and Sterling Shepard. It's not awful. But a lot of those guys play in specialized roles, i.e. Jaden Reed and Deebo Samuel, and I think you nailed it on the head, Aidan. He's going to have to go to a coaching staff that knows how to use him. I've seen people comp him to Cordero Patterson, which is interesting in terms of athleticism, build, offensive weapon. Keegan, you're a big Gamecocks guy. Shout out to Cox. I know this breaks your heart because you love Legette. What are your thoughts? Are you fading Legette? Do you think this is a justifiable stance to move him down the ranks? I'm curious to know as a fan.
I think people who have caution are right to do so. I do think there's a lot more to Xavier Legette's story than just late production. He did play wide receiver in high school, but he also did play quarterback. Now there is some transferable stuff there, and he's been through a ton of adversity as a kid, but he's a local South Carolina kid, and the late breakout is super puzzling. But when you see in 2022, what really changed was he started running kick returns. They wanted the ball in his hands, very obviously. He's still maturing. Dude, he had 15 kick returns for 441 yards and a touchdown that he took for 100 yards to the house in 2022 against A&M, actually. And then again in 2023, he had 10 kick returns for 213 yards. He was averaging over 20 yards kick return. So he's obviously a playmaker. He's obviously somebody who's good with the ball in his hands. The late breakout is very concerning. I personally would still take a swing on him because what if he is A.J. Brown? What if he is just finally matured and finally come into who he is as a wide receiver?
Somebody bonk him. He needs to go back home to his wife. Get in the car, go home, call the Uber.
Look, in this range of players, the hit rate is
yeah, you're right.
You don't know what you're getting, right? So I'm down to take a bet. He might be too rich for my cost, depending on where he goes in the draft, but I'm still in on Legette. analytic profile is extremely puzzling, and it doesn't make any sense to me at all. But I'm going to go with the last season. I'm going to go with the fact that they had him returning kicks, because he's a playmaker and the ball in his hands is watching it is insane. So I'm still in. You can't kick me off of Xavier Legette, and I'm drinking the cock Kool-Aid.
Okay. The cock Kool-Aid?
That might be an AO, yo.
Pause.
There was one thing I just wanted to comment on that, like the fact that you've got 6'3", 225, getting a 30-yard head start at I'm not tackling that.
The new kick return rule is pretty sick for Xavier Legette. Like, I think he's gonna.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that could help him stick on it.
And I only bring it up because you mentioned the floor is like one contract and done, and it is very possible. But like, if he can find a way to be a benefit on your special teams, like especially in his rookie year, I can feel that lengthening his career. Like, he's obviously a playmaker in my mind when I watch it. So Cordell Patterson is a very fun comp, and Cordell Patterson has had splashes and returns as wide receiver, as running back, but he's never done one thing his entire career. So maybe that's in Legette's future. Yeah,
I like that. What's interesting is when we get to my prospect, who I think has a really low ceiling but pretty safe floor. It's a little bit different from Legette. I'd rather take a swing at that point in the draft on a bigger ceiling in Legette than have somebody with a lower ceiling, if that makes sense. But I just still think there are guys with higher ceilings ahead of him that I like, or at least safer floors that are comparable ceilings. But before we get into the next guy here, two things. If you are part of the 70% of people that are watching this video that aren't yet subscribed to the Regression of the Mean podcast, you know what to do. Like this video, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications to make sure you are not missing any of the content we are dropping weekly coming your way. Second, we love hearing from you guys in the comments. If you love these receivers, hate these receivers, love Keegan's new beard. If you have thoughts on what the Bears should do at wide receiver, at number 9. Oh, I just tipped my hand there. Put it in the comments below. We love hearing from you guys.
He's connected to Ryan Poles.
All right. So the guy that I'm fading is someone coming into the draft process after the Senior Bowl. I was really excited about. He's just like a football guy. Like, if you read these stories about him in 8th grade and starting high school, the stories is that he had to take a plane to fly from one island to the other to play football for his high school. This guy was basically showing up late to school 30 minutes each day because it took multiple hours to commute to play ball. And we love a football guy. And this guy is Roman Wilson, the national title wide receiver for the Michigan Wolverines. So you love all the intangible stuff with Wilson. But then you start digging into the profile and what he projects to be at the next level. And I think it comes out to being more of a good real-life NFL player than a good fantasy football option. This is via Matt Harmon, who, again, is a wide receiver guru at Reception Perception. Go give him a follow on Twitter. Go pay for his service. I highly recommend it. Matt Harmon charts wide receiver routes, the whole entire route tree, looks at their success rate, is able to separate their context from the actual counting stats. And Harmon had Roman Wilson below the 20th percentile success rate against man, zone, and press. Those aren't very good numbers for Wilson. And I think what causes that little concern for me is he's actually a good athlete. He's really fast. He tested well at the combine, which we like, especially at his size. But that doesn't translate as a route runner. And so right now, he's not a separator. He's not a technician. He mostly excels at running 9 routes. And because of that, you're looking at a deep ball, clear out speed slot receiver, which I think is, like I said, really interesting from a football standpoint and building out an offense. But from a fantasy football perspective, it means a high variance player. And I want my diminutive slot only players, because he's basically slot only at this point, to be separators, can see 8 to 9 targets, catch the ball 8 to 9 times. Like that's what I want out of a wide receiver at this point. And he was solid in contested catch situations. He does have some juice with that speed. You can, give him some handoffs, which I think is interesting as an offensive weapon. But as a slot speed guy who isn't a route technician, I don't really love that. And his stats aren't great, but I think you can throw his stats out because that was a low volume passing offense in Michigan. And when you look at his team receiving yardage market share, he's actually pretty good. So analytically, it's fine. His breakout isn't great. His stats aren't amazing, but we can throw away a lot of the stat stuff if they're showing out really well on film. And I think he projects more as a Tyler Boyd type than he does an ARSB personally, in terms of like ceiling. And I think that's a good real life player, but I can't justify having him ahead of Ricky Pearsall, Malachi Corley, Jalen McMillan, Javon Baker, Jermaine Burton, or Malik Washington. I think all of those guys are better than Roman Wilson. And again, this is someone I think I was really excited about coming into the process, but I've kind of soured on Roman Wilson. It sucks because he seems like a grinder. He seems like, he wants work on a Saturday. He went to his boss. He went to his landlord and said, raise my rent. I want to work harder. That's kind of the vibe you get from him, which these are guys that I want to bet on. Grind time, grind mode, never stop. But if he's not that good, then it's hard to get really excited about from a fantasy perspective. So I'm curious, what are your guys' thoughts on Roman Wilson?
I don't know I think it's just boring to me, right? Like, I guess, I don't know. And I don't think there's anything bad with that. But yeah, from a fantasy perspective, it's very interesting because you just talked about kind of like where he might profile when he gets to the NFL. And on our last episode where I talked about Jalen McMillan, who ran way more routes from the slot, like that was very much his defined role. And I like talked about why that was so good. But maybe Roman moving into only a slot, only role doesn't serve him well because he's played a little bit all over the field. So I don't know. It's tough. I just backed up a slot only player on our last episode, talked about why I like him as a prospect. And Roman to me just doesn't feel as exciting. Like the JJ's like recent comps are, Randall Cobb, Philip Dorsett, and John Mechie. I mean, the Randall Cobb one is great, but John Mechie not great so far, just based off how the career started. So he's a hard player for me to read, like the low volume passing offense that Harbaugh ran at Michigan. How do you put stock into that? Like, he is a really hard worker, obviously outside of football and on the football field, but does it translate to fantasy points? I don't know for me. And you mentioned all the wide receivers. There's so many good wide receivers in this class. I feel like I would pass on Roman for a number of people that you listed. Hell, I'll take Xavier Legette over Roman Wilson any day of the week.
Too. He's ahead of him right now in the rankings, so that's fine. But I'd rather take the swing on Legette's upside than Roman Wilson's floor, per se.
Yeah, I think it's something like we've talked about too. Like this will be like a good like NFL football player, I think, but for fantasy purposes, really doesn't do it for me. And again, like I know like you talk about some of the like reception perception stuff. Like it's not the all telling tale, if you test poorly here, like you're doomed and vice versa. But Matt Harmon typically,
he's got a good hit rate,
has a good read.
He's got a good hit rate.
Hits and misses, and it's like he is like sub 20th percentile, and kind of all the three main categories, which is concerning. It's it's not where you want to be. So this is someone that I'm really all not that high on too. To your point, like the stats were low, but Michigan just ran the ball like 40 times a game. So take that with a grain of salt. The tape's fun. It's it doesn't like quite make me feel like alive by any means, but like it's fun. It's someone who good locker room guy will be first in.
He's the scrappy guy.
First in, last
He's the scrappy guy. He's the guy that people want to say lad is, like the gym rat. Like that's Roman Wilson. Roman Wilson's the scrapper.
Like he'll be on like the social media accounts, like doing the sketch, things walking into the building, like everyone's gonna love him, but it's like
that is such a deep call out. You're extremely online.
Harmon said he felt more impressed with JJ McCarthy after watching the Roman Wilson tape, because Wilson was not a good separator over the middle of the field, and was like, McCarthy's actually pretty damn good at throwing the ball to a guy who doesn't get open that well. So that was like, oh, I did not come here for the JJ propaganda, which is like, oh, jeez. When you're not good, I mean that's crazy. That's crazy coming from Harmon. All right, so we're out on Roman Wilson at rookie ADP. We're out on Xavier Legette. We like Legette more than Wilson. Okay.
We are not.
Aidan and I are at this point.
The majority.
We talked a lot about this wide receiver on our last episode. We were talking about Jalynn McMillan, but we mostly focused on Jalynn McMillan. We didn't really spend a lot of time talking about Jalynn Polk. So, Keegan, give us the other side of this UW sandwich. And why you're kind of out on Jalynn Polk.
Yeah, so I think what it comes down to is, and I talked a little bit about, if you haven't watched the video, go watch our undervalued wide receivers from this class you should be drafting. I talked about Jalynn McMillan, his profile. So when it comes to why I'm kind of out on Jalynn Polk, his position that he will likely play in the NFL will be different than McMillan. I talked about how 11 personnel sets are rising, 3 wide receivers are on the field more often. Jalynn Polk right now profiles as, kind of an X wide receiver or Z wide receiver. Sorry, he's going to be like kind of in those 2 personnel sets. So it's like he's going to have to earn targets. He's going to have to earn playing time as a second wide receiver in 2 wide receiver sets. Now, maybe he gets shifted into the slot, but not everybody can be a slot wide receiver. He definitely did not have the same amount of slot snaps as McMillan did. He played 37% of his routes in the slot, 62.4 out wide in 2022. That bumped up a little bit in 2023. Played 41% of his routes in the slot and 58.7% of his routes out wide in that year. So knowing that, it's like, okay, he's going to have to fight really hard to earn a 2 wide receiver spot in those sets and be on the field. And especially as a rookie, which is why I think McMillan has an easier path to fantasy points right out of the gates, which is why I'm kind of more in on that. And if you go back and look at the production, Jalynn Polk is a Texas Tech transfer. He didn't produce a ton at Texas Tech. Mind you, got injured, only played 3 games. Then he goes to Washington. And in 2022, he's by far the third fiddle between Odunze and McMillan. And McMillan outclassed him by a significant margin in all of those stats, yards, receptions, targets, yards per route run, PFF receiving grade. Like, it was very clear to me that McMillan, just by even watching too, was like the preferred option. McMillan gets injured and Jalynn Polk benefits from that greatly. I mean, Polk's statistics compared to McMillan's are so much better in 2023. He was the second yards leader, second in receptions, second in targets earned. The yards per reception was good. He's definitely a good deep threat, and he's pretty good on the contested catch rate as well too, which McMillan can't do. He just doesn't show signs of that, but they were willing in Washington to give Polk some contested catch options, playing out wide. But his first downs per route run was less than McMillan's as well too, even in 2023 when he was better statistically. I think for me, his path to fantasy relevance right away is going to be harder for McMillan. I don't necessarily think Polk is a bad player, but I have McMillan over him because I want somebody who's going to contribute right away. And if Polk gets stuck in a shitty situation, he's going to have to beat out probably a really good wide receiver for 2 wide receiver sets, or he's going to have to completely shift the type of player he is to fit into an offense and get on the field. So that's kind of why I've leaned more on McMillan as a player that I like, and Polk is probably a player that I won't prioritize.
I just think it's value. Like if McMillan is slightly better than Polk and he's 6 spots lower, I think it just comes down to a simple value equation. Like,
yeah, and that's the thing too. His draft capital is projected higher, and so like in somebody like JJ Zacharyason's model, who puts in draft capital as like into his ZAP score, his ZAP score comes out a little bit better than, or like his draft capital score will come out better than McMillan's because he will get drafted higher, and that might entice you to draft him in your dynasty football draft. But I don't necessarily think that's because of he's a better player than McMillan. I think it's maybe the type of role people are expecting him to play, but that is a harder role to earn full-time playtime in. So there's a ton of things he's good at, and there's a ton of things I like. I mentioned the contested catch rate and really good hands, good ball tracking. Like, he does that deep ball out wide vertical stuff super well, but doesn't have the same release package as McMillan, like not as shifty. The route running is okay, like limited production until his final season of college football. Like, if you go back, he's not quite Xavier Legette, but it did take a little bit to get to those marks he reached in 2023. His yards per team pass attempt wasn't great either. Low dominator rating and an age 21 breakout versus age 20 breakout at Jalynn McMillan. So
yeah. I mean, McMillan basically put up the same numbers as Odunze in 2022. It took like we talked about it. It took the McMillan injury for Polk to break out, and then Polk had a really strong season. So you see his RAS score. McMillan tested better, and Polk was more explosive with his vertical and broad. I think that shows up on tape. You see more of an explosive player, but he didn't run agility, so I don't have his.
Yeah, we don't have that. The 40 was slightly slower, but it's not
fine. We can live with that.
Yeah, that doesn't move the needle for me.
Yeah, he jumped well, and his 40 was fine. 40 doesn't mean everything, right? But I would love to know what his agility was. I think that could maybe give us a better idea. But I don't know. He's a good player. He's definitely a good player. But McMillan and him are very comparable, and there's a 6-spot difference. So let's buy the dip on the difference and fade the more expensive one if they're similar type players.
It's a combination of, I think, recency bias and projected draft capital that will shift him above McMillan in those rookie drafts that you have. And he might go to a situation where they don't have a second wide receiver. And I'm not telling you to not draft him then. This is obviously pre-draft, but I think right now, if I had to pick, I'm going McMillan.
Okay. Aidan, thoughts on McMillan versus Polk? One last time.
You guys kind of nailed it. We talked about it last episode too. Like, this is really just like value and like, two similar players. I think McMillan's slightly better. And 6 slots lower, it's it's nothing against Jalynn Polk. I think he's a good football player, like you said, but no, in terms of value, I'd rather just wait for the player that I deems a little better that I'm probably getting a full round later. With like running backs and other players like baked into that like round 2 in your dynasty drafts. So it's probably like an early 3rd round pick for McMillan.
All right, boys, 3 overvalued wide receivers. We have Xavier Legette, Roman Wilson, and Jalynn Polk. Keegan still has not swayed on Legette. We get it. I think Legette's the one. I think we're still just a little bonked over. Like we'll let it slide a little bit. The other guys, it's like get to the back of the line. All right. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We appreciate you. If you have any comments, make sure to drop them in the comment section below. Anything to say to the mean team before we get out of here, guys?
We're almost there, followers and listeners. You're almost at the draft. You will know who your team has. You will see new players in your team's jersey very soon. We're going to get there together, I promise.
16 days. 16 days. Put it on the whiteboard and update it every day. We're so close. Hang in there.
All right, boys. Thank you for joining, and until next time.